I'll admit, when I first moved in, the HOA's thick binder of rules felt almost comforting. It promised order, a guarantee that my largest ever investment would be protected from, well, from people who might paint their house neon green or park an RV on the lawn. Naivety is a beautiful, fragile thing. The gnome was the catalyst. My 8-year-old niece, Lily, handed him to me with the solemnity of a knight bestowing a sacred relic. "His name is Barnaby," she'd whispered. "He protects the flowers." How could I not give him a prime spot by the azalea bush? He was ceramic, maybe 12 inches tall, with a cheerful, slightly lopsided smile and a bright red pointy hat. He was whimsy. He was joy. The first violation letter arrived just 3 days later. The paper was so thick I initially thought it was a wedding invite. The language was so aggressively formal it was almost comical. Garish, cartoonish garden gnome. I read it aloud to my cat, who was unimpressed. I figured it was a mistake, a form letter sent by an overzealous bot. I sent a polite, almost apologetic email back, explaining the sentimental value and assuring them it was a temporary fixture. The auto-reply was a masterpiece of bureaucratic silence. The bylaws are clear, so I played ball. I moved Barnaby to the back patio, nestled between 2 potted ferns. It was my private, fenced-in space. Surely, the long arm of the HOA couldn't reach back there. I was wrong. The second letter was colder, sharper. The phrase visual nuisance was a punchline waiting to happen. They'd sent Brenda's lieutenant, an elderly man named Gary with a terrifyingly steady hand, to peer through the slats in my fence from the common greenbelt to document the offense. That's when the laughter died in my throat. This wasn't about a gnome anymore. This was a test of sovereignty. Paying that first fine felt like swallowing acid. But I did it. I wasn't going to give them an easy excuse to slap a lien on my house over a ceramic lawn ornament. But as I wrote the check, a switch flipped inside me. This was no longer a minor annoyance. It was a campaign, and I needed a strategy. I went to an office supply store and bought a heavy-duty accordion folder, a pack of multicolored tabs, and a new printer. The petty paper trail had begun. My first order of business was total, unimpeachable compliance. I became the most boring homeowner in Sunset Meadows. My grass was precisely 2.5 inches high. My trash cans were brought in from the curb the moment the truck rumbled away, no later than 10:15 a.m. on Tuesdays. I even took a color swatch to the hardware store to ensure the paint for my front door's touch-up was a perfect match for desert sand beige. I documented it all with time-stamped photos, creating a portfolio of my own suburban conformity. It was my armor. Then, I began my deep dive into the enemy's playbook, the Sunset Meadows covenants, conditions, and restrictions. I brewed a pot of strong coffee and settled in. It was a staggering tapestry of control. Beyond the hose reel and play equipment rules, I discovered Bylaw 11E, which mandated that all window treatments facing the street must be white, off-white, or eggshell. Bylaw 17B declared that holiday decorations may be displayed no earlier than the second Friday of November, and must be removed by 5 p.m. on January 2nd. It was absurd, but within that absurdity, I was looking for patterns, for loopholes, and most importantly, for hypocrisy. I was no longer just reading rules. I was learning how the game was played. My research into sustainable living wasn't just a hobby. It was a core value. So, after the gnome debacle settled into a Cold War, I decided to make a move I thought was beyond reproach: installing solar panels. This wasn't a decorative flamingo. It was a serious financial and environmental investment. I was meticulous. I spent weeks researching the most discreet, low-profile panels on the market. I hired a top-rated, licensed contractor. I filled out the HOA's infamous architectural modification request form in triplicate, a document so thorough it demanded the model numbers of the mounting brackets and a sworn statement that the panels would not create audible or psychological nuisance. I submitted my packet, confident that even Brenda couldn't argue with increased property values and lower carbon footprints. I was naive. The denial letter was a masterpiece of moving goalposts. Traditional aesthetic was the primary excuse, a term so vague it was meaningless. But they also cited potential for reflective glare to disturb avian flight patterns and the disruptive visual rhythm of the rooftop lines. It was pseudoscientific gibberish dressed up in legalistic language. My appeal was robust. I included a printout of our state's Solar Rights Act, which explicitly prohibits HOAs from banning solar installations. I provided signed letters from 3 neighbors stating they had no objection. I even included a photo simulation showing how little the panels would be visible from the street. Brenda's final response was a single sentence, delivered via certified mail. The Architectural Committee's decision is final. Any unapproved installation will be met with immediate and escalating fines. They weren't just being difficult. They were blatantly ignoring state law, betting I wouldn't have the stomach for a legal fight. So I called my contractor. "We start on Monday," I told him. The gauntlet had been thrown, and I was done stepping around it. The panels went up over 2 sun-drenched days. With every bracket secured and every dark, gleaming panel laid into place, I felt a mix of exhilaration and cold dread. I was officially a rebel in beige clothing. The retaliation was not just swift, it was theatrical. The fines began at a punitive $500 per day, a figure clearly designed to shock me into submission. The cover letter, again on that heavy cream stock, accused me of willful and flagrant disregard for community standards. But the letters were just the opening salvo. Brenda had a grassroots army of discontent, and she knew how to deploy it. My next-door neighbor, Gary, the same one who had spied on my gnome, suddenly found a new hobby: power washing his driveway at 7 a.m. every Saturday, the spray accidentally misting over my fence to drench my patio furniture. Another neighbor, a woman named Carol who I'd only ever seen while she was peering through blinds, began leaving handwritten notes on my car. One, written in a frantic cursive, read, "Some of us chose this neighborhood for its uniformity. Conform or leave." It was signed, "The Silent Majority." The social pressure was immense. I'd walk my dog and feel the weight of stares from behind manicured hedges. The once friendly wave from people washing their cars was replaced by averted eyes and tight, disapproving smiles. I was being shunned. But instead of cowing me, it solidified my resolve. Their pettiness was my fuel. I started taking my own covert photos of Gary's deliberate overspray, of Carol's notes before I collected them as evidence. My file was no longer just about bylaws. It was a dossier on the culture of fear Brenda had cultivated. And it was almost complete. The sound of heavy boots on my roof was my personal alarm clock that Tuesday morning. I peered out the window to see 2 men in hard hats, one already prying at the edge of my most expensive panel with a crowbar. The sight sent a jolt of pure, white-hot fury through me. This had moved beyond fines and nasty notes. This was vandalism, a physical violation of my home. I took a deep, steadying breath. The calm that settled over me was more terrifying than any outburst. I marched outside, phone already recording. "Excuse me," I said, my voice unervingly level. "What are you doing on my roof?" The one with the crowbar looked down, startled. "Work order from the HOA, ma'am. Says these are unauthorized and need to be removed." I asked to see it. The document was signed by Brenda Shackelford, authorizing the removal of unapproved fixtures and billing the cost to the HOA's operating fund. She was using our own money, my money, to destroy my property. "You see this panel?" I said, pointing. "I own it. You see this roof? I own it. If you detach that panel, you are committing willful destruction of private property. I have all the permits and purchase receipts right here. I suggest you get down, or the next conversation will be with the police." They hesitated, exchanged a look, and began packing their tools. The battle lines were now physically drawn. But I knew a defensive victory wasn't enough. Brenda would just find another way. I needed a decisive counterstrike. I remembered the old plat maps and the fenced-in substation. A plan, audacious and beautiful in its simplicity, began to form. It was time to show them what a real power move looked like. The community clubhouse was packed, buzzing with the usual gossipy energy. I walked in, my professional-grade folder feeling like a shield. Brenda gavelled the meeting to order, her eyes narrowing as she saw me.
Ah, Alex.
Here to finally settle your outstanding fines. I hope, she said, her voice dripping with condescension. I'm here to discuss the equitable application of our bylaws, I said, my voice clear and steady. She waved a dismissive hand. We don't have time for another soliloquy about your gnome. This isn't about the gnome. I placed the folder on the table with a definitive thud. This is about Bylaw 5A, which prohibits unapproved structural modifications. Specifically, the 400-square-foot sunroom you added to your property in 2019. The room fell silent. Brenda's face went from smug to ashen. That is a lie. I have all the permits. I'm sure you do, I replied smoothly. But you don't have the unanimous board approval required by our own covenants. I've checked every page of the meeting minutes from that year. It was never discussed, let alone approved. I slid the glossy, damning photos down the table. They showed her beautiful, illegal sunroom from multiple angles. A low murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. And that, I continued, my voice rising, brings me to the crew you sent to my roof today, using HOA funds, to destroy my private, permitted property. That's not a violation. It's criminal vandalism. Brenda was sputtering. You're out of order. This is slander. It's libel, actually, I corrected, holding up a USB drive. And it's all documented right here. And then, as if I had summoned it with a thought, the world went dark. The lights died, the air conditioner whirred to a halt, and the room was plunged into a stunned, silent blackness. In the chaos of phone flashlights flickering on, I stood up. That, I said into the quiet, is what happens when you mess with someone's source of power. The implication hung in the air, thick and undeniable. The blackout lasted just 20 minutes, but the shift in power was permanent. In the dim clubhouse, illuminated by frantic phone lights, the spell of Brenda's authority was broken. The panic over the lights was nothing compared to the clarity everyone suddenly had about her hypocrisy. The meeting dissolved into chaos, but it was a productive chaos. A retired lawyer named Mr. Gable, who had always seemed ambivalent, stood up and began citing parliamentary procedure to call for an immediate vote of no confidence. It wasn't even close. Brenda was ousted before the power even came back on. The following weeks were a blur of delicious fallout. An emergency audit of the HOA's finances revealed she had used association funds for the solar removal project and for landscaping that suspiciously only ever benefited her own property line. She was forced to reimburse the HOA and faced a messy hearing about her unauthorized sunroom. The new board, led by a chastened but earnest Mr. Gable, didn't just reverse my fines. They enacted a Sunset Meadows reformation. The Barnaby Amendment now allows for reasonable personal expression. The Solar Access Rule fast-tracks green energy projects. Most importantly, the Brenda Rule ensures no single person can ever wield that much petty power again. My panels now sit proudly on my roof, and Barnaby guards the azaleas, a tiny ceramic hero. The neighborhood is still beige, but it feels different now, lighter, freer. Sometimes, to protect your own power, you have to show everyone what it's like when it's gone.